Lucas Carter sat at the long metal table and tried not to show his worry. Around him, alien voices filled the meeting room of Harmony Station. The Zephyrians made clicking sounds with their 4 arms, while the crystalline beings hummed in low tones that made the air vibrate. Both groups had been fighting each other for over 200 years, and now they wanted to make peace. At least that's what they said they wanted. Lucas was the only human in the room. He represented Earth and all the human colonies spread across this part of the galaxy. The other species saw humans as weak. They thought humans were too soft, too connected to their plants and gardens. They had no idea how wrong they were. In his small quarters on the station, Lucas kept a few plants from Earth. There was a peace lily with white flowers, some bamboo shoots that grew in a blue pot, and a young oak tree in a larger container. The station crew thought these were just decorations to make him feel at home. They didn't know the truth. Lucas had learned to talk with plants, not with words, but through smells, touch, and feeling. It was something only humans could do, and it had taken them 50 years to figure it out. The plants could sense things that humans couldn't. They could smell fear, lies, and anger in ways that no machine could detect. Right now, his peace lily was trying to tell him something important. "We propose to divide the Kepler sector," said Commander Zix of the Zephyrians. His voice came through, a translator box that made it sound flat and cold. "Your human colonies there are too small to matter anyway." Lucas nodded and made notes on his tablet. But part of his mind was focused on the lily back in his room. Through their connection, he could feel its leaves moving in a pattern. The plant was picking up chemical signals from the air, reading the emotions of everyone in the room. The lily was scared. "The crystalline collective agrees," hummed General Thrain. Her crystal body glowed with blue light as she spoke. "The humans can keep their little garden worlds. We have no interest in dirt and plants." Both alien leaders made sounds that Lucas's translator said were laughter. They thought it was funny that humans cared so much about growing things. They saw it as a weakness. Lucas felt the bamboo shoots in his room start to lean toward the wall that faced the meeting room. Bamboo was very good at sensing vibrations and electrical fields. The plants were telling him that both groups of aliens were lying. Their heart rates were up and they were giving off the chemical smell of deception. "That's very generous," Lucas said with a smile. "We humans appreciate peaceful solutions." But his oak sapling was sending him different signals. Oak trees were slow to grow, but very good at sensing long-term danger. The young tree's roots were moving in his room, spelling out patterns that Lucas had learned to read. The message was clear. These aliens were planning something bad. The talks continued for 3 more hours. Both sides made offers that sounded fair on the surface. They would stop fighting each other. They would share some trade routes. They would leave human space alone. Everyone would be happy. But Lucas's plants told him a different story. Every time the aliens mentioned humans, their stress chemicals spiked. When they talked about peace, their electrical patterns showed they were thinking about war. And when they looked at Lucas, all his plants reacted with the same message. These beings wanted to hurt humans. "I think we should take a break," Lucas said when the formal session ended. "These are big decisions. I need to talk with my government." "Of course," clicked Commander Zix. "Humans always need more time to think. That's why stronger species must lead." General Thrain's crystal body pulsed with agreement. "We'll wait for your answer, but not too long. Some opportunities don't last forever." Lucas went back to his quarters and locked the door. His plants were all moving now, their leaves turning toward him as he approached. The peace lily's flowers had opened wider, releasing more of its scent. The bamboo shoots were swaying even though there was no wind. The oak sapling's newest leaves were pointing down in a sign of danger. He sat on his bed and put his hands near the plants. Humans had discovered that they could share information with plants through touch and breathing. It was like having a conversation, but with feelings and pictures instead of words. The plants showed him what they had sensed during the meeting. Fear and anger from the aliens, but not fear of each other. They were afraid of humans and angry that humans existed at all. The plants had also picked up plans, shared through alien pheromones that they thought no one could detect. Both the Zephyrians and the Crystalline Collective were working together in secret. They planned to attack human colonies while Lucas was still on the space station. They would destroy Earth settlements and divide the territory between themselves. Then they would go back to fighting each other, but with humans out of the way forever. Lucas activated his communication device and sent a coded message to Earth. The code was based on plant growth patterns, something no alien species would think to watch for. His message was simple. The talks had failed, war was coming, and humanity needed to prepare. But as he sent the message, Lucas smiled. The aliens thought humans were weak because they loved plants. They had no idea that this love was actually humanity's greatest strength. Soon the galaxy would learn what happened when you threatened a species that could make entire worlds fight back. The plants in his room seemed to sense his change in mood. Their leaves turned toward the light, and the peace lily's flowers opened, even wider. They were ready for what came next. The talks had collapsed, and now the real war would begin. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood in the command center on Earth, reading the coded message from Lucas Carter for the third time. Around her, the walls were covered with living vines that helped clean the air and provided oxygen. Most people thought they were just decorations, but Kate knew better. The plants were listening, and they were angry. "Call an emergency meeting," Kate told her assistant. "Get Ben Rodriguez here right away and contact Amy Foster. Tell her to stop whatever she's doing and come home immediately." Within 2 hours, the Terra Defense Council was meeting in the underground facility beneath Geneva. But this wasn't like any war meeting in history. Instead of weapons and battle plans covering the tables, there were seeds, soil samples, and small potted plants. The room smelled like a greenhouse. Dr. Ben Rodriguez walked in carrying a large case filled with plant specimens. He was the head of something called the Botanical Defense Initiative, a program that most people thought was about growing food for space colonies. They were wrong. "How bad is it?" Ben asked as he set his case on the table. "The worst," Kate replied. "Both alien groups are planning to wipe us out. They think we're weak because we care about plants." Ben opened his case and pulled out a small fern. As soon as it touched the table, the other plants in the room began to move. Leaves turned toward the fern, stems bent in its direction, and flowers opened wider. To most people it would look like a coincidence, but everyone in this room knew the truth. "The network is ready," Ben said quietly. "We've been preparing for this day for 20 years. Captain Amy Foster arrived an hour later, still wearing her spacesuit from her ship. She commanded a vessel called New Eden, but it wasn't a warship. It was something much more dangerous, though the aliens didn't know it yet. "How many seed stations do we have ready?" Kate asked her. 47 are fully operational," Amy reported. "Each one can deploy a full ecosystem within 72 hours. We have another 30 stations under construction, but they're not ready yet." An older man at the table raised his hand. General Patrick White had been skeptical of the plant program for years, but even he was starting to understand. "I still don't get it. How do plants help us fight spaceships?" Ben smiled and touched the fern again. Immediately, every plant in the room responded. The vines on the walls grew visibly longer, flowers bloomed instantly, small trees stretched their branches toward the ceiling. It was like watching a time-lapse video, but it was happening in real time. "Plants and humans evolved together on Earth," Ben explained. "For millions of years we helped each other survive. We learned to read their signals, and they learned to respond to ours. But in the last 50 years we've discovered something amazing. We can actually talk to them." He picked up a small seedling and held it in his palm. "This little plant can sense things we can't. It knows about chemicals in the air, electrical fields, vibrations in the ground. When I touch it like this, it shares that information with me. And when I think certain thoughts, it responds." The seedling in his hand began to grow. Its stem stretched upward and new leaves appeared. In less than a minute, it had doubled in size. "Now imagine," Ben continued, "if we could do this with entire forests. If we could make plants grow where we needed them, when we needed them. If we could turn every human world into a living defense system. Amy Foster stepped forward. That's what the seed stations are for. Each one contains thousands of earth plant species, modified for rapid growth and enhanced communication. When we deploy them on a world, we're not just planting a garden, we're creating a network that can think, react, and fight back. Kate looked around the room at the other military leaders. Most of them still looked confused, but a few were starting to understand. "Show them the Titan test," she said to Ben. Ben activated a wall screen that showed footage from Saturn's moon Titan. The video was only 3 months old, but it had been classified until now. It showed a barren, rocky landscape. Then the scene changed, and the same area was covered with strange-looking plants that seemed to glow with their own light. "We deployed a seed station on Titan as a test," Ben explained. "Within 1 week, we had a functioning ecosystem that could survive in conditions that would kill most Earth life. The plants learned to process the methane atmosphere and convert it to oxygen. They grew root networks that could detect seismic activity from across the moon, and they developed new ways to communicate that work in near-vacuum conditions." The video showed something even more impressive. The plants on Titan were moving in coordinated patterns like a slow-motion dance. Groups of them would lean in one direction, then another, creating waves of motion across the landscape. "They're talking to each other," Amy said. "And through our human plant speakers, they're talking to us. Every world we've seeded becomes part of a larger network. Information can travel from plant to plant faster than our fastest spaceships." General White leaned forward. "You're telling me that flowers can communicate across space?" "Not exactly," Ben replied. "But when human colonists work with the plants, they can share information through the network. A plant speaker on one world can influence plant growth on another world, as long as there are humans there to help translate." Kate stood up and walked to the window. Outside, she could see the gardens of Geneva, where thousands of people tended to plants that most thought were just for beauty. In reality, every flower, tree, and blade of grass was part of humanity's defense network. "The aliens are coming," she said. "They think they're attacking weak humans who care too much about gardening. They have no idea that every human world is connected by roots and leaves and pollen. They don't know that our plants can sense their ships coming from light years away. And they definitely don't know that we can make entire ecosystems fight back." Amy Foster was already reaching for her communication device. "I'll get New Eden ready for launch. We need to start seeding the frontier worlds immediately. And I'll contact our plant speakers on the colonies," Ben added. "It's time to wake up the network," Kate nodded. "Send the message to all human worlds. Tell them the Great Awakening begins now. Every garden becomes a fortress. Every farmer becomes a soldier. And every plant becomes our ally." As the meeting ended, the plants in the room seemed to sense the change in mood. Leaves rustled without any wind, and flowers turned toward the people as if listening to their words. Across the galaxy, on every human world, similar plants were getting the same message. The war was about to begin, but it wouldn't be the kind of war the aliens expected. They were about to learn that when you threaten a species that can make worlds themselves fight back, you've made a very dangerous mistake. Commander Jake Thompson watched the alien ships appear in the sky above New Garden Colony. There were 12 Zephyrian warships, their dark metal hulls gleaming in the sunlight. Behind them came 8 crystalline vessels that looked like flying diamonds. Both groups had come to destroy his home. Jake stood in the middle of what looked like an ordinary farming community. Houses were scattered between fields of corn, wheat, and vegetables. Children played in gardens full of flowers. Old people sat under fruit trees reading books. To the aliens looking down from space, it must have seemed like an easy target. They had no idea what they were really seeing. "Lisa, are you ready?" Jake spoke into his communicator. Dr. Lisa Chang answered from the colony's main greenhouse complex. "The network is fully active, Jake. Every plant on this world is listening." Jake walked over to a large oak tree in the center of town. He placed his hand on its bark and closed his eyes. Immediately, he could feel the entire colony through the tree's root system. Every garden, every farm, every wild forest was connected, and all of it was ready to fight. The first Zephyrian ship began its attack run, charging its energy weapons. The beam of bright blue light shot down toward the colony's power station. But as it got close to the ground, something strange happened. The beam scattered and bent, missing its target completely. High above, the Zephyrian pilot tried again. Same result. His weapons wouldn't work properly. Jake smiled as he felt the copper trees doing their job. These special trees had been growing around the colony for 3 years. Their leaves and bark contained high amounts of metal that the plants could control. When working together, they created electromagnetic fields that could deflect energy weapons. "What's happening to our systems?" The Zephyrian commander's voice came through intercepted communications. The answer came from the forest itself. Hundreds of copper trees were now working as one, their metal-rich leaves creating interference patterns that made energy weapons useless. The trees had learned this trick from human plant speakers who had studied electromagnetic theory. The crystalline ships tried a different approach. They landed near the edge of town and began sending out ground troops. The crystal soldiers marched in perfect formation, their bodies gleaming like living jewels. Their weapons could cut through metal and stone with ease, but they had never fought against a forest that could think. As the first group of soldiers entered the tree line, thick vines dropped from above. The vines wrapped around the aliens' weapons and pulled them away. More vines came from the ground, tangling their legs and making them fall. The soldiers tried to cut the vines, but for every one they destroyed, 3 more appeared. Lisa Chang watched the battle from her greenhouse, her hands touching a network of sensors that were actually living plants. Through them, she could see and control the entire forest defense system. "Activate the warning flowers," she told her assistant, a young man named Tim Brooks, who had learned to speak with plants when he was just a child. Tim touched a cluster of bright red flowers, and immediately the air around the alien soldiers filled with yellow pollen. To humans, the pollen was harmless, but crystalline beings breathed through their crystal skin, and the pollen made them dizzy and confused. They began stumbling around, unable to tell which direction was which. Meanwhile, the root network under the ground was busy collecting information. Every footstep, every movement, every alien heartbeat was detected and shared. Jake could feel where each enemy soldier was located, even when they tried to hide behind rocks or trees. "There's a group trying to circle around from the north," he reported to the colony defenders. But the plants were already responding. A line of thorny bushes began growing rapidly along the northern path, creating a barrier that grew thicker by the minute. The thorns were coated with a sap that would make the alien skin itch terribly, though it was harmless to humans. The Zephyrian ships tried landing in the open fields, thinking they could avoid the forests. But Jake's people had prepared for this too. The moment the alien boots touched the ground began to change. What looked like ordinary grass was actually a special hybrid that could grow incredibly fast when activated. The blades shot upward, wrapping around the alien's legs like green rope. The grass was also connected to the root network, so it could coordinate its growth to trap multiple enemies at once. "This is impossible," came another intercepted alien transmission. "Plants don't behave this way." But for the humans of New Garden, this was completely normal. They had lived with these plants for years, learning to work together as partners. Every family had a plant speaker, usually one of the children who had grown up communicating with the colony's green network. 8-year-old Emma Davis sat in her family's garden, her small hands touching a sunflower that was taller than she was. Through the flower, she was helping coordinate the defense of the entire southern sector. The sunflower's face followed the alien movements, and its roots sent signals to other plants about where the enemies were going. "They're trying to get to the water treatment plant," Emma reported, her voice calm despite the battle raging around her. Immediately, the plants around the water facility responded. Water lilies in the treatment ponds released a cloud of spores that made the air thick and hard to breathe. Cattails bent down to block pathways, while underwater roots formed nets that would trap anyone who tried to swim across. The battle continued for 6 hours, but it was unlike any fight in galactic history. The aliens had superior weapons, better armor, and more advanced technology, but they were fighting an entire world that could think and respond as one living system. Every time they found a way through one defense, another appeared. When they destroyed one group of plants, 10 more took their place. When they tried to burn the vegetation, special fire-resistant species emerged from underground to continue the fight. Finally, the alien commanders had seen enough. Their forces were exhausted, confused, and completely unable to accomplish their mission. They had lost dozens of soldiers to what seemed like an impossible enemy. "Retreat to the ships," came the order. "We'll try orbital bombardment instead." But as their remaining forces ran back toward their landing sites, they found that their ships were no longer alone. The landing areas were now surrounded by trees that hadn't been there before. Fast-growing species had created natural walls around the alien vessels, and from space more human ships were arriving. But these weren't warships either. They were seed ships, carrying the tools to turn any world into a living fortress. The aliens had expected to fight humans. Instead, they had discovered that they were fighting the planet itself. And as word of their defeat spread through their fleets, both the Zephyrians and crystalline forces began to realize they might have made a terrible mistake. Jake Thompson stood under his oak tree as the alien ships fled into space. Around him, the plants of New Garden were already returning to normal, their leaves turning back toward the sun, their defensive chemicals fading away. But the network remained active, ready for the next attack. And across the galaxy, on every human world, similar networks were waking up and preparing for war. The aliens had wanted to destroy humanity's gardens. Instead, they had just learned that humanity's gardens could destroy them. Colonel Steve Harrison stood on the bridge of his ship, looking at the world below. Kyltos was the main industrial planet of the Zephyrian Empire, covered with metal cities and factories that made weapons for their war fleet. In a few hours, those factories would be completely useless. Steve's ship carried no bombs or missiles. Instead, its cargo holds were filled with thousands of small pods, each one containing earth plants that had been specially prepared for this mission. The plants had been modified to grow fast and survive in alien environments, but they were still recognizably from Earth. "Are we really going to attack a planet with seeds?" asked Lieutenant Carl Murphy, Steve's second-in-command. "Not attack," Steve replied. "We're going to make friends with it." The first wave of pods launched from the ship like shooting stars. They scattered across Kyltos, targeting the spaces between buildings, the cracks in concrete, and any patch of soil they could find. Each pod was designed to break open on impact and immediately begin growing. On the planet's surface, Zephyrian workers stopped and stared as strange green shoots began pushing up through their carefully maintained metal streets. At first they thought it was some kind of weapon that would explode, but the plants just kept growing and growing and growing. Within the first hour, earth vines were climbing the sides of Zephyrian buildings. What had been tiny shoots were now thick green, ropes that moved with purpose. The vines found electrical cables and wrapped around them, but instead of cutting the power, they began to redirect it. The plants had been taught by human engineers how electrical systems worked. Now they were using that knowledge to slowly take control of the city's power grid. Dr. Helen Price watched the operation from her research station, Gaia's Haven, which orbited a gas giant 3-star systems away. Through her connection to the plant network, she could sense what was happening on Kyltos as if she were standing there herself. Helen was humanity's most skilled plant speaker. She could communicate with vegetation across incredible distances by linking her mind to the galactic plant network that humans had been building for decades. Right now, she was connected to plants on 47 different worlds simultaneously. "The Kudzu is establishing root contact with local systems," she reported to Steve's ship. "Beginning integration with Zephyrian infrastructure." On Kyltos, the alien authorities were starting to panic. The earth plants were growing faster than anything they had ever seen. Kudzu vines were covering entire buildings in minutes. Strange flowers were blooming in their factories, releasing sweet-smelling chemicals that made the alien workers feel tired and confused. But the most frightening thing was how smart the plants seemed to be. They weren't just growing randomly. They were targeting specific systems with surgical precision. The vines found the city's main computer networks and began growing into the cables. But instead of destroying the electronics, they formed biological interfaces that let them communicate with the machines. The plants had learned to speak in electrical signals, Within 6 hours, every traffic light in the major cities was being controlled by Earth Ivy. The alien vehicles couldn't move because the plants were directing all traffic away from important areas. Emergency services were blocked by walls of fast-growing bamboo that appeared wherever they tried to go. "How is this possible?" demanded General Korv, the Zephyrian military commander. "Plants don't have brains." But these plants did have something like brains. Each one was connected to every other plant through root networks and chemical signals. And through the human plant speakers, they could access knowledge and make decisions as if they were one giant thinking organism. Captain Ryan Clark received new orders while his fleet was approaching the crystalline homeworld. The crystal beings had tried to create artificial environments that would kill Earth plants, filling their cities with toxic gases and radiation. They thought this would protect them from humanity's green allies. They were wrong. Ryan's ships carried a different kind of Earth plant. These were extremophils, species that actually thrived in hostile conditions. There were fungi that ate radiation for food, algae that turned poison into oxygen, and mosses that grew stronger when exposed to toxic chemicals. "Deploy the radiation gardens," Ryan ordered. Thousands of new pods fell toward the crystalline cities. These ones were dark purple and black, containing plants that looked nothing like the green vegetation most people expected. As they landed and began to grow, the toxic atmosphere that was supposed to kill them became their source of power. The crystalline beings watched in horror as earth fungi began covering their crystal buildings. The fungus wasn't just growing on the surface, it was actually eating the crystal itself, breaking it down at the molecular level and using the minerals to grow even faster. Meanwhile, back on Kael'tos, the situation was getting worse for the Zephyrians. Dr. Helen Price had established full network connection with the Earth plants now covering half the planet. Through this connection, she could coordinate plant growth across the entire world in real time. "Steve, I'm ready for Phase 2, she reported. "Understood, Helen. Beginning selective targeting." The Earth plants on Kael'tos suddenly changed their behavior. Instead of growing everywhere, they began to focus on specific targets. Military factories found their machinery covered in vines that grew into the mechanical parts, jamming the equipment without destroying it. Weapon storage facilities were sealed shut by walls of thorns that would take days to cut through. But civilian areas were left completely alone. The plants seemed to know the difference between military and non-military targets, growing around homes and schools without touching them. "The network is learning their language," Helen explained to her research team. "The plants are reading chemical signatures, electrical patterns, and even radio transmissions. They know which buildings are important to the war effort, and which ones aren't." On the crystalline homeworld, Ryan Clark's extremophile plants were having an even more dramatic effect. The radiation-eating fungi had grown so large that they were creating their own atmosphere, one that was perfectly breathable for humans but made the crystalline beings feel sick and weak. "Sir," reported his communications officer, "we're getting surrender requests from both planets." "Already?" Ryan was surprised. "We've only been here for 12 hours. But the alien military leaders had seen enough. On Kael'tos, Zephyrian factories were completely shut down, and their workers couldn't get through the maze of earth vegetation that now covered the streets. On the crystalline homeworld, their cities were being dissolved by earth fungi that treated their crystal buildings like food. Most terrifying of all was the realization that the humans were controlling all of this from thousands of light years away. Through their plant network, they could coordinate attacks across multiple star systems simultaneously, adapting to each world's specific conditions and targeting only military assets. Dr. Helen Price sat in her laboratory, her hands touching a small oak seedling that connected her to plants across the galaxy. Through this connection, she could sense the fear of the alien populations and the desperation of their military leaders. "Colonel Harrison, Captain Clark," she said into her communicator. "I'm detecting massive troop movements. Both empires are pulling their forces back from human space. They want to negotiate." Steve looked out at Kael'tos, where earth plants now covered most of the planet's surface. The vines were spelling out messages in huge letters across the sides of buildings, written in both Zephyrian and human languages. The message was simple. We can make this stop whenever you want to talk. I think they're starting to understand, Steve said. We're not trying to destroy them. We're just showing them what happens when you threaten a species that can make entire worlds fight back. Ryan Clark watched similar messages appearing on the crystalline homeworld, spelled out in patterns of glowing fungi that could be seen from space. The aliens were learning that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their armies. It was their friendship with every living thing that grew from soil and reached toward the sun. The galaxy was about to discover that when humans said they wanted peace, they had the power to make that peace happen, whether their enemies agreed or not. Ambassador Lucas Carter walked back into the same meeting room where this had all started, but everything was different now. The Zephyrian and crystalline delegates looked tired and scared. Their proud uniforms were wrinkled, and their confident voices had become quiet whispers. Lucas carried a simple clay pot containing a sunflower that was just beginning to bloom. To anyone watching, it looked like an ordinary plant. But this sunflower was connected to every other plant in human space, and through them, to plants now growing on alien worlds across the galaxy. Gentlemen, Lucas said as he sat down and placed the pot on the table, I believe you wanted to discuss terms. Commander Zix of the Zephyrians stared at the flower with obvious fear. What is that thing? It's a sunflower, Lucas replied calmly. From Earth. Would you like to see what it can do? Before anyone could answer, the sunflower began to change. Its petals rearranged themselves into complex geometric patterns, forming mathematical symbols that both alien species recognized. The flower was solving equations that would challenge their best computers, using nothing but the movement of its petals. Dr. Maria Santos sat beside Lucas, her notebook filled with plant communication symbols. She was one of humanity's most skilled plant speakers, able to translate thoughts and information between humans and the Galactic Plant Network. The network wants you to know something, Maria said to the alien delegates. Every factory on Keltos, every building on the crystalline homeworld, every ship in both your fleets, they're all within reach now. As if to prove her point, the sunflower's stem began to grow longer. Its roots pushed through the bottom of the pot and started spreading across the table's surface. The aliens watched in horror as the roots found tiny cracks in the metal and began to grow into them. This station is now part of our network, Lucas explained. The plants we brought here have been growing in the walls and the air systems in every space where life can exist. We could take control of this entire facility in minutes if we wanted to. General Thrane's crystal body flickered with nervous energy. You're threatening us. No, Lucas said with a gentle smile. We're explaining reality to you. The war is over. You lost the moment you decided to fight a species that can make entire ecosystems fight back. The sunflower on the table began to release a sweet scent into the air. Both alien groups immediately became calmer, their aggressive postures relaxing. The flower was releasing carefully controlled pheromones that affected their nervous systems, proving that humans could influence alien emotions through their plant partners. How long have you been able to do this? Commander Zix asked. Maria consulted her notes. We've been learning to communicate with plants for about 50 years, but the galaxy-wide network has only been possible for the last decade. Every human colony, every ship, every settlement is now connected through our plant partners. She gestured to the sunflower, whose petals were now displaying a map of the galaxy, made from tiny color changes. Dots of light appeared where human colonies existed, and lines of green connected them all together. Information travels through this network faster than your fastest ships, Maria continued. A thought from a human on Earth can reach plants on the other side of the galaxy in hours, not years. The aliens were beginning to understand the true scope of what they faced. This wasn't just about humanity being good at growing plants. This was about an entirely new form of life that combined biological and technological capabilities in ways no one had imagined possible. What do you want from us? General Thrane asked. Lucas leaned back in his chair. Peace. Real peace, not the fake negotiations you were planning before. Both your empires will stop fighting each other and stop threatening human space. In return, We'll help you learn to work with your own planetary ecosystems. And if we refuse? Commander Zix's voice was barely a whisper. The sunflower's petals suddenly turned dark red, and its sweet scent changed to something sharp and warning. At the same time, both aliens received emergency communications from their homeworlds. The Earth plants on their planets had responded to the sunflower's chemical signal by growing larger and more aggressive. Then the plants currently growing on your worlds will continue their work, Lucas said simply. Your factories will stay closed. Your ships will remain grounded. Your cities will be covered in vegetation that eats your buildings for breakfast, Maria added. But your people won't be harmed. Our plants know the difference between military targets and civilians. We're not interested in conquest or destruction. We just want to be left alone to tend our gardens. The two alien leaders looked at each other, then back at the humans. Both their civilizations were ancient and proud, but they had never faced anything like this. How do you fight an enemy that can turn entire worlds against you without firing a single shot? There is another option, Lucas said, his voice becoming warmer. The Terara Accords, a new kind of peace treaty for the galaxy. He activated a holographic display that showed the proposed agreement. Under the Terara Accords, humanity would become the galaxy's mediators, helping resolve conflicts between species. Human plant speakers would work with other civilizations to help them develop better relationships with their own planetary ecosystems. Many species in the galaxy are struggling with environmental problems, Maria explained. Dead worlds, poisoned atmospheres, ecosystems that are collapsing. We can help fix those problems. Our plants can clean toxins, restore soil, and bring life back to worlds that seem hopeless. The sunflower on the table began to bloom more fully, its petals opening to reveal a beautiful golden center. The scent it released now was peaceful and hopeful, making everyone in the room feel calmer and more optimistic. You would help us? General Thrain sounded surprised. After we tried to destroy you? That's what gardens are for, Lucas replied, to make things grow instead of letting them die. Over the next 3 hours, the Terara Accords were signed by all three species. The Zephyrian Empire and Crystalline Collective agreed to end their war and accept human mediation for future disputes. In return, humanity would help both civilizations learn to work with plant life to solve their environmental problems. But the real change was deeper than any treaty. Word of humanity's capabilities spread quickly through the galaxy. Other species began to wonder what they might learn from these strange beings who could make planets themselves choose sides in a war. Dr. Maria Santos walked to the window of the space station and looked out at the stars. On dozens of worlds throughout the galaxy, human children were already teaching alien youngsters how to communicate with plants. The network was growing, connecting more species and more worlds every day. The sunflower in the meeting room turned to face the window, its golden face following the light from distant suns. Through the plant network, it could sense new growth beginning on worlds that had been barren for centuries. Forests were returning to planets that had been stripped of life. Gardens were blooming in places where nothing had grown for generations. Lucas. Carter stood beside Maria, watching ships from many different species arriving at the station. They all came seeking the same thing, to learn how to make their worlds green again. I think we're going to need bigger gardens, he said with a smile. The galaxy had learned to fear humanity's gardens. Now it was learning to hope for them instead. And in the deep space between the stars, seeds carried by solar winds were already beginning their journey to worlds that had never seen Earth life before. The age of gardens had begun,